Imagine a late November afternoon, roughly 450,000 years ago, in what we now call Boxgrove, England. The air is biting, smelling of damp earth and the metallic tang of an incoming frost. A group of about 15 hominids, ancestors known as Homo heidelbergensis, are standing over the carcass of a massive horse. They aren't making a sound, at least not the kind we would recognize as language. There are no sentences, no verbs, no complex instructions. Yet they are performing a task of surgical precision. Each individual knows exactly where to stand, when to pull back the hide, and when to drive a flint tool into the joint. They are moving with the synchronized grace of a modern pit crew. If you were standing there, the silence would feel heavy, almost deliberate. It forces us to confront a foundational mystery that has haunted evolutionary biologists for over a century. How did these people, who lived hundreds of thousands of years before the first word was ever spoken, manage to build a world that required such intense, high-stakes cooperation? We are looking for the silent language, the hidden architecture of communication that kept us alive when we had nothing but our bodies to tell the story. This is a cold case investigation into the most successful secret in human history. To solve it, we have to treat the human body like a crime scene, looking for the physical traces of a communication system that left no fossils. By the way, researchers used to think this was impossible, but new forensic techniques are proving them wrong. For a long time, the dominant theory was what we call the grunt and point model. This is the classic Hollywood trope of the caveman, a hulking figure who can only manage a few guttural noises and a vague gesture toward a mammoth. But as we dig deeper into the evidence, that version of history starts to fall apart. It's our first false lead. Simple grunts and pointing can get you through a single interaction, but they cannot sustain a culture that lasted for over 1,000,000 years. They cannot teach a child how to identify 40 different types of medicinal tubers or how to coordinate a hunt that requires 3 separate groups to ambush a herd from different directions. The grunt was never the main event. It was just the background noise for a much more sophisticated system. Our investigation begins with a piece of evidence that is literally staring you in the face right now. Look into a mirror, or look at the person closest to you, and focus on the eyes. Notice the large, clear area of white surrounding the iris. This is the sclera. Interestingly, out of more than 200 species of primates, humans are the only ones with a highly visible white sclera. In chimpanzees and gorillas, the sclera is dark, usually brown or black, which helps them hide the direction of their gaze from predators or rivals. Evolution, however, took a massive risk with the human eye. It made our gaze highly visible, essentially turning our eyes into a lighthouse that broadcasts exactly what we are looking at to everyone around us. This is the cooperative eye hypothesis, pioneered by researchers like Michael Tomasello at the Max Planck Institute. This isn't just a cosmetic detail, it's a communication tool. Before we had words to say, "Look at that," we had eyes that couldn't help but show it. By tracking where an elder was looking, a young hunter could learn the subtle signs of a hidden predator long before a sound was made. The eye was our first pointer, a silent broadcast of intention that allowed for what psychologists call joint attention, the ability for 2 minds to focus on the same third thing simultaneously. But eyes can only tell you what someone is looking at, not what they are thinking. For that, we need to look at the meat map, the 43 muscles in the human face. This is our second clue. Most of these muscles serve no purpose for chewing, breathing, or protecting the skull. They exist solely to manipulate the skin into expressions. We are, quite literally, walking billboards of emotional data. Paul Ekman, the world-renowned psychologist who spent decades mapping these expressions, discovered that the big 6 happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise are universal. They are baked into our neurological hardware. If you take a photograph of a person in a state of pure terror, that image is readable to any human on Earth, regardless of whether they speak the same language. Parenthetically, this suggests that these expressions aren't cultural inventions at all, but biological protocols. Before speech, the face was a high-bandwidth data stream. It allowed our ancestors to negotiate social hierarchies, signal reproductive interest, and de-escalate violence without ever opening their mouths. It was a system of radical honesty. Because many of these microexpressions are involuntary, you couldn't easily lie to your tribe. The face was the original social media, and it had been running for millions of years before the first syllable was uttered. If the face provided the emotional context, something else had to provide the verb, the action. This brings us to the most controversial clue in our investigation. The gestural bridge. There is a persistent theory in linguistics that the hands were the true pioneers of language. This idea is backed by the discovery of mirror neurons by Giacomo Rizzolatti and his team in the 1990s. These are specialized brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you watch someone else perform that same action. It's the neurological basis for empathy and imitation. A quick aside, this is why your hands might twitch when you watch someone else drop something. In the pre-speech era, this was the primary mode of education. We didn't learn to make stone tools through a lecture. We learned through over-imitation. To understand how deep this goes, we have to look at the Acheulean hand axe. This is a teardrop-shaped stone tool that remained virtually unchanged for over 1,000,000 years. Dietrich Stout, an experimental archaeologist at Emory University, used MRI scans to monitor the brains of modern people as they learned the ancient art of flint knapping to create these axes. He found something stunning. The areas of the brain that light up when making a complex stone tool are almost identical to the areas used for complex language processing. Creating a hand axe isn't a random act of banging rocks together. It's a hierarchical, sequential process. You have to plan 5 steps ahead, understanding that if I strike here, it will create a platform for the strike I need 3 minutes from now. This is the exact same if-then logic that governs grammar. The hands were training the brain to think in sentences long before the mouth was capable of saying them. The hand axe wasn't just a tool for butchery. It was a physical manifestation of a proto-grammar that lived in the muscles and the motor cortex. This leads us to a glaring question in our case. If they were so good at using their hands and eyes, why did they ever bother to start talking? The answer might lie in a dark, dense forest or a moonless night. Gestures are fantastic, but they have one fatal flaw. They require line of sight. You cannot gesture to someone who is behind a tree, or someone who is busy looking at a piece of fruit they are picking. This is where the third clue comes in, the vocal call system. Many animals have alarm calls. Vervet monkeys, for instance, have distinct calls for snake, eagle, and leopard, and the rest of the troop reacts accordingly without needing to see the threat. But humans did something different. We took the emotional music of our voices and began to refine it. Before we had words, we had prosody, the rhythm, pitch, and melody of sound. Think about the way you talk to a baby or a dog. You use a high-pitched, sing-song voice to signal safety and affection, and a low, sharp staccato tone to signal danger or no. Interestingly, this motherese or iddies is found in every human culture and seems to trigger specific hormonal responses. Early humans likely communicated through a sophisticated system of musical vocalizations. Researchers like Stephen Mithen call this the model, standing for holistic, manipulative, multimodal, musical, and mimetic. These weren't words. They were sound pictures. A certain rising whistle might have mimicked the sound of a specific bird, signaling its presence as a food source. A low, rhythmic growl might have signaled the need for the group to huddle together. It was a communication system that lived in the throat but felt like music. This explains why rhythm and melody still have such a profound, almost primitive hold on us today. We were singers long before we were talkers. But every investigation needs a smoking gun, a piece of evidence that proves the suspect was capable of more than we thought. For us, that smoking gun is the hyoid bone. This is a tiny, U-shaped bone in the throat that supports the tongue and makes a wide range of vocal sounds possible. For decades, scientists believed that only Homo sapiens had a hyoid bone positioned in a way that allowed for speech. They thought Neanderthals were literally incapable of making the sounds we make. Then, in 1989, researchers at a site called Kabara in Israel found a Neanderthal hyoid that was virtually identical to our own. Parenthetically, this discovery sent shockwaves through the field of anthropology and forced a massive rewrite of our history. If the hardware for speech was there 60,000 years ago, and perhaps much earlier, the mystery shifts. It's no longer about whether they could talk, but why they needed to. This brings us to the verdict of our investigation. The transition to speech wasn't a sudden aha moment where a caveman suddenly sat up and said a perfect sentence. Instead, it was a multimodal integration. For millions of years, we were using a layered system. Eyes to track attention, faces to signal emotion, hands to describe action, and voices to provide the rhythmic, emotional glue of the tribe. Speech was just the final layer, the efficiency update. It took all those separate channels and compressed them into a single, high-speed stream of data that could be used in the dark, around corners. And while our hands were busy working, the final piece of evidence comes from Blombos Cave in South Africa, dating back roughly 75,000 years. There, archaeologists found pieces of ochre engraved with cross-hatched patterns and tiny seashells with deliberate holes drilled into them for stringing. These are the world's oldest beads. This is symbolic communication. Once you have a bead, you are saying something that words can barely capture. You are saying, I belong to this group, or I have this status, or I am grieving this person. This is communication that persists even after the person is gone. It represents the moment we stepped out of the eternal now of the animal kingdom and began to live in a world of symbols, pasts, and futures. By the way, this symbolic leap is what ultimately allowed us to move from small tribes of 150 people to the massive, global civilizations we have today. So, when we look back at those hunters in Boxgrove, standing over that horse in the cold afternoon air, we shouldn't see primitive beings struggling to communicate. We should see masters of the silent language. They were reading the tension in each other's shoulders, the dilation of each other's pupils, and the rhythmic shifting of their tools. They were communicating with a density of information that we, in our word-heavy modern world, have largely forgotten how to process. We often think of language as the thing that made us human, but the truth revealed by this investigation is the opposite. We were already profoundly, deeply human before we ever said a word. We had already solved the hardest problems of cooperation, empathy, and social structure using nothing but our bodies and the air between us. We tend to assume that because the fossil record is silent, the people were too. We imagine a world of quiet, dull-witted brutes who stumbled into language like a lucky accident, but that assumption is dismantled by the sheer weight of the chronological evidence. The silent architects of our lineage were using the Achillean hand axe, a tool that requires the same brain regions as grammar for an incredible stretch of time. To put this in perspective, humans have had writing for about 5,000 years. We have had complex speech for perhaps 100,000 to 200,000 years, but our ancestors were coordinating, teaching, and communicating through the sophisticated physical language of the hand axe for exactly 1.8 million years before the first word ever spoken. Language wasn't the start of our story. It was just the closing argument. The case for pre-speech communication is a reminder that we are built for connection. Our eyes want to show, our faces want to tell, and our hands want to build together. Long before we had the names for things, we had the things themselves: love, fear, duty, and curiosity. We were never silent. We were just waiting for our mouths to catch up with our minds. If you want to see this ancient hardware in action, just watch two people who love each other sit in a room together without speaking. They aren't not communicating. They are using a system that was perfected over nearly 2 million years of survival, a system that doesn't need a single vowel to make itself perfectly clear. Our journey through this mystery leaves us with one final haunting realization. We often feel that modern life is isolating, that we are disconnected from one another despite our constant texting and talking. Perhaps that's because we've over-relied on the newest, thinnest layer of our communication, words, and neglected the ancient, deep-rooted channels that were our primary tools for nearly 95% of our history. We are a species designed for the silent language. We are built to read the subtle shift in a friend's gaze or the tension in a stranger's posture. These aren't just hunches. They are the echoes of a million-year-old survival strategy. When we consider the incredible endurance of our ancestors, who thrived through ice ages and volcanic winters without a dictionary or a grammar book, we have to respect the power of what they had. They didn't just survive. They laid the foundation for every thought you have ever had and every sentence you will ever speak. They proved that the most important things we have to say to one another don't actually require a voice. They require a presence. They require being there, in the cold, over the kill, with our eyes open and our hands ready. As we close this case, look at your own hands. They are the descendants of the hands that napped Flint in Boxgrove. Your eyes are the descendants of the eyes that first turned white to share a secret. You are a walking, breathing archive of a time when we spoke with everything we were. And the most incredible part of that history is that it's not really history at all. It's still happening. Every time you share a look across a crowded room or a rhythm on a dance floor, you are speaking the first language. And as the evidence shows, you've been practicing it for 1.8 million years. This realization changes the way we look at our own capacity for understanding. If we can communicate so much without words, then the barriers we think exist between us, the language barriers, the cultural divides, are much more superficial than they appear. Beneath the noise of our different vocabularies lies the same ancient universal code. It's a code of shared intentionality and physical empathy that was forged in the harshest environments the planet could throw at us. It's a code that says, I see you, I am with you, and we are doing this together. It's a message that was delivered flawlessly 450,000 years ago, and it's a message we are still trying to get right today. In the end, the mystery of the silent language isn't just about the past. It's a manual for the present. It tells us that when words fail, we have something much more reliable to fall back on. We have the meat, the bone, and the rhythm. We have the 43 muscles of the face and the mirror neurons of the brain. We have a legacy of cooperation that is so deep it is literally written into our anatomy. We were never just monkeys who learned to talk. We were masters of connection who eventually found a way to put that connection into words. And that is the most impressive verdict of all. As you go about your day, pay attention to the parts of your conversations that don't involve sound. Notice how you know what someone is going to say before they say it. Notice the way you adjust your posture to match someone you like. You are witnessing the operation of a system that is older than the mountains you see on the horizon. You are watching the silent language at work. It's a system that doesn't need to be taught because it's who you are. And it's a system that, for all our technological progress, we have never managed to improve upon. The next time you find yourself in a moment where words aren't enough, don't worry. Your body has been preparing for that moment for nearly 2 million years. Just let the eyes, the hands, and the heart do the talking. They've been doing it since the beginning, and they've never once let us down. So here is the truth of the matter, the final piece of the puzzle that dismantles every assumption we have about our primitive past. We like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution because we have Shakespeare, we have the internet, and we have the ability to debate philosophy. But all of that is built on a foundation that was laid during a period of stability so profound it's hard to wrap the modern mind around it. We are not the smartest people to ever live. We are just the ones with the loudest tools. The people who lived before speech were the ones who did the heavy lifting. They were the ones who figured out how to be us when there was no one else to show them how. They are the heroes of a silent epic, and we are simply the ones who finally found the words to tell their story. This investigation shows us that the history of human communication isn't a ladder we climbed. It's a tree that grew. Speech is just the topmost leaves, rustling in the wind. But the trunk, the branches, and the deep ancient roots, those are the nonverbal systems we've explored today. And it's those roots that keep the whole thing standing. Without the eyes, the face, and the hands, speech would be a hollow, meaningless noise. It's the ancient hardware that gives the modern software its power. And that, more than anything, is why we will never truly be post-physical or digital-first creatures. We are, and will always be, the people of the silent language. The mystery of how we talked before we had words isn't a question of what we were missing. It's a revelation of what we've always had. It's a reminder that we are more connected, more intuitive, and more ancient than we ever dared to believe. And in a world that often feels fractured and loud, that might be the most important lesson of all. We have everything we need to understand one another. We always have. We just have to remember how to listen to the silence. And as we look at the timeline of our existence, the final number should haunt you. We think of human history as the last few thousand years of cities and kings. But if you take the entire history of the genus Homo, starting from the first hand axe 1, 8 million years ago, the era of speech, even by the most generous estimates, represents less than 10% of our time on this planet. For 90% of our journey, we were the masters of a silent world, coordinating complex societies and surviving the impossible without a single written word. The assumption that we needed speech to be us isn't just wrong, it's off by exactly 1.7 million years.